Hello, I'm here with Grania Sheehan, and my name's Richard Connelly, Registrar for the Diocese. And today I've invited Grania to come along and help me unpack the child safe standards. So, Grania,
Thank you, Richard.
we've heard your name, but I'll get you to introduce yourself.
Okay, my name's Grania. I've been worshipping in the Gippsland Diocese for 8 to 9 years now. I originally came from Queensland. I live just over the back of this paddock. We're here in Willow Grove. A little bit about me, I guess, Richard, why I'm interested in this issue of child safety. Look, I come from a background of family psychology, and I was a researcher for many years, interested in family dynamics, child abuse, child protection and family violence. And I've spent a number of years as a lawyer working in a similar field as well. So I guess my experience of these issues comes from the coalface, comes from people seeking protection from these behaviours, people seeking compensation and people hurting from what's been done.
Awesome. So why are we having this conversation now?
I guess we're having this conversation now because, I guess to put it bluntly, we didn't protect children. We didn't protect vulnerable people and institutions. The church institutions and other institutions, we failed on a fairly significant level to do that. So that's where this is coming from. How do we not make the same mistake again? And for me, there's also a messaging in it. It's not just how do we practically not make the same mistakes again, is how do we tell people that we've harmed, that we recognise that and that we really want it to never happen again and that we've listened to you. How do we do that? We act on it.
So these learnings are now expressed, the learnings through the Royal Commission are now have found themselves, after many years, being expressed in some child safe standards.
They have, and I think for people who are looking at all the policy documents and child safe standards on the diocesan websites, saying, well, where does all this bureaucratic stuff and form filling in come from? Its genesis is in the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. So it had its foundation in that, and it has come through. It is something that's applied to services that involve children all around Australia. So it's not singling out churches. Churches have their own expression of these standards, but every service involving children will have to apply or comply with this form of standard.
So today we're going to unpack the first three standards.
Yeah.
So let's just have a sweeping overview. What are they all about?
The first standard, number one, that's come in, is a standard that relates to cultural safety. So how do we make our parishes culturally safe for children and young people who come from First Nations backgrounds? And in our own diocesan standards and other cultural backgrounds. But the standard one, as articulated in law, is about welcoming First Nations children and young people into our parishes. I think for me, one of the important things to get my head around in this standard is, what does that mean in practice? Because can we welcome a First Nations child? Can we welcome a young person from a different cultural background and not be welcoming full stop? And you can't do that. Children come with their parents, the children come into parishes with their aunties, their uncles, their extended family, their kin. You must, and I think it's really important to get your head around, with this particular standard, you must be culturally welcoming full stop to be welcoming to a child or a young person from an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander background or from a different cultural background. And I think one of the important things too is to kind of explore as a parish, where are we going to be here? You have to comply with the rules. The standard is such that parishes are going to have to come on board with this eventually, and there will be compliance with these rules. And you've got to work out, well, how do we comply with this? this? How do we do this? Our time is short, our resources are limited. You can think about it at that level. There's nothing wrong with thinking about it at that level. Or how do we how do we embrace changing hearts, opening hearts, welcoming people from other cultural backgrounds, and welcoming our First Nations brothers and sisters? And I think that's a tricky discussion to have. Where do you want to be as a parish? Compliance, or do you want to move further into change of heart in pursuing cultural safety? Because, and this might be a bit facetious, but if you just want compliance, I've heard people describe compliance as stick a few posters up. You know, pop a painting or pop the flag up on your backboard at the back of your church and send a few people off to a training program, and you will likely tick the compliance box. Are you going to be a welcoming space for First Nations parents and children? Are you going to be a welcoming space for children from other cultures? Probably not. So you have to reach out. I think that's one of the things, if you want to embrace cultural change, it is about going out and asking people from those backgrounds, you know, what would make you comfortable to be in our parish? Do not assume.
The second standard is about embedding child safety practices. So rather than cultural safety, as it applies to a whole group, we're talking about specific policies and practices we put in place to keep individual children safe.
And this, if you like, I think of this as the foundational standard. You know, in a sense, you know, you probably, you know, you may want to start here. You've got to start across all of these different standards. You know, this is foundational. This particular standard, you know, foundational to prevention, protection, and action in the child safety space. So it's an important one to have a look at. Critically important for your parishes to have a look at. We've talked a little bit already, Richard, about the genesis of the child safety standards, which they began their life in a recommendation from the Royal Commission. But I just, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind quoting just a couple of short paragraphs from the Commission. And this is from the section of the Commission, the volume of the Commission report, where the voices of the people who'd experienced child sexual abuse in institutions was heard. This is what they said. And this is the Commission's analysis of what they said about experiencing abuse in institutions. Victims are less likely to disclose if they feel they won't be believed, expect a negative reaction or response, or believe their disclosure will have negative consequences for them. And I just want to share with you something that comes from survivors' experiences of disclosing child sexual abuse in institutions, including the Anglican Church, including other churches. And I'll read this out to you because I think it makes a really important point about following the rules, compliance versus culture change, which is a really important distinction to get one's head around. So this is the finding from the report. Institutional policies and procedures that describe and provide examples of inappropriate behaviour, outline how to identify and report suspicions, and specify record keeping and information sharing requirements help keep children safe. Now that's what parishes are being asked to do in these standards. Okay, that's your bottom that's your bottom line that in a sense you have to get a handle on to be compliant. But this next point, this next theme to emerge from victims' reports and survivors' reports, I think is key. However, if these policies and procedures are routinely ignored or not implemented or regarded as unimportant within the culture of the institution, the culture of the service, the culture of your parish, it will be more difficult for children to disclose and for others to identify child sexual abuse. So it's not just compliance. They're talking here about a cultural shift to embody prioritising child safety in parishes.
Awesome. Well, with that first step, we're not asking parishes to do the work of developing those policies, and you will find a link below this website of this video leading to the child safety and wellbeing policy that has been developed by the diocese.
Yeah.
And so that is something, the first step, and what we're inviting parishes to do is to start that journey of reflection and exploration to see how they can embody the essence of the policy.
Yes, absolutely. And be, you know, and in doing that, you will tick off compliance. But in a sense, you know, what we're saying is let's take it just a little bit further than ticking the box on compliance. And, you know, ultimately culture change is what drives a safe environment.
So the last one we'll look at today is empowering children to be involved in decision making.
Yeah, look, this is for me, this is very close to my heart, voice, and giving vulnerable people and people that we don't hear from voice in the decisions that affect them. And that's what this particular standard is all about. It is about giving children and young people recognising their rights, their human rights, and I'm going to refer to where the voice comes from in a minute, and giving them the right to participate in decisions that affect them. But it's a really important, I think, not a warning on this, but something to be aware of, and that maybe parishes need to be explicit about in considering how they go about giving voice to the child and voice to young people, is that when you allow vulnerable others to have voice, so when you say, okay, we're not going to control everything, we are going to give the people who are affected by this the ability to say what they think about it, what they want done, and how they've experienced the harm. You relinquish in that moment some of your power. And that power is the power to determine what is in another person's best interests. Because that begins to shift. Because it's not just you determining what's in the best interests of someone else, you are listening to and taking into account the voice of the person who is being harmed or is feeling unsafe. And you have to step back from determining their best interests being what you exercise, the power you exercise. So to give voice to the child in decision making, in a sense, I think you have to be explicit about this. It's going to take away a little bit of power from the church because you don't know what's going to come back at you. What are they going to say? How are they going to want this handled? Takes away a little bit of power from parish councils, clergy, lay ministers. It takes away a little bit of the power of others to determine what's in someone's best interests when you listen to their voice and you must take into account what they're saying to you. Now, the voice of children and young people has just not come out of the blue. So it actually emanates from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 12. It says exactly what this standard says. But it is a fundamental human right to give the child voice in decisions that affect them. It is a human right that Australia and its system of democratic government and law reform has actively supported and protected. You know, we can't find our way around this. But I think, you know, going back to our belief system and our faith, we have a saviour who gave voice to the voiceless. You know, we can't walk away from giving a voice to someone who is seeking a voice, and a voice to someone who has been voiceless in our community.
Amen to that.
Thanks, Richard.
But if I'm sitting on a parish council and we don't have any active children's ministry, why do we have to worry about this?
Look, I think for me there's two components in this. So there is the keeping children safe. There is being culturally safe and attracting other people into our parishes. Is facilitating diversity. I mean, there's reasons why we need to do it, why we need to keep children safe. And it's a practical reason. If you don't have children in your parish, it's a fair enough question to say, why are we bothering this? Why are we being burdened with this? We have limited time, limited resources. And I would say to you, because it is sending a message. It sends a message out there to the mothers and fathers of the victims, survivors of abuse, the families of victims and survivors of abuse, the victims and survivors of abuse, that as an institution, as a service, we take what happened to you seriously. We heard your voice and we are implementing these changes. It may not be directly relevant to us yet, but we are sending the message that we care. And I think for me it comes down to that really simple messaging to the community. We've heard, we did wrong, and we care. And across the board, we're going to communicate that to our communities within the parishes, and we're going to communicate that to the community beyond our parishes as well.
Great. Thanks, Grania. We'll look forward to coming back and unpacking some of the further child safe standards.
Thank you.